The topics that you are all discussing are all very different. It goes from labor to more environmental issues, macro data, remittances. It's very different. Yeah. And also the methodologies are different. What you are using is floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will be presenting my research proposal about my thesis topic, which is about is low input farming input efficient. To give you a small background detail, because I draw the differences between high input farming systems and low input farming systems. As you can see from this photo, that there's a clear differentiation between high input farming systems and low input farming systems, because you can see that high input farming systems are labor intensive, capital intensive, machine intensive, and input intensive, which is in complete contrast with what low input farming system stands for. So you can clearly find out that there is a huge difference between them. To give you a brief introduction what low input farming system means, it says low input farming system or low external input farming systems. So what does it mean? It just means that we use less external inputs, as simple as that. But what happens if you use low external inputs? If you use low external inputs, you have to replace it with something else. What do you replace it with? You replace it with internal inputs, because then you have to provide nutrients or other resources to your crop or your enterprise. So that's why you make a replacement with internal inputs. But the main point being here is I said less use of external inputs. So low input farming system does not mean that you will prohibit synthetic inputs. You use them, but you use them really, really less. And why is that? Because when you apply the principles of low input farming, there is no need for synthetics. You already have your internal inputs and you use it. To go further, I am talking about agriculture, and I'm sorry I did not mention that my research area will be the European Union. So I'm talking about agriculture, I'm talking about small farms, I'm talking about low input farming, and I'm talking about Europe. So it will be not appropriate if I don't talk about the European Union's policy on agriculture, which is commonly known as CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy. I went through the document of the Common Agriculture Policy. I will be frank with you, I did a selective reading, but when you look at the policy agreement, the policy framework, it uses a lot of words like eco-friendly, being less emission of greenhouse gases, and they talk about organic farming, they talk about low input farming systems, they talk about small farmers. That happens a lot in the document of Common Agriculture Policy. So the motivation for this study comes from this fact, because the CAP annually costs the European Union some 55 billion euros. That's a lot of money. And to put it in perspective, it's 40% of the European Union's budget. So why not study something which is so important to the European Union? Why not try to make something more efficient, which is so important to the European agriculture? As I said before, that the low input farming systems and high input farming systems, there's a difference, and there's a difference in terms of sustainability too, because everybody knows that the low input farming systems are more sustainable than the high input farming systems. They have a trademark of eco-friendly. That is about productivity, that is about sustainability and input use and being different from each other. But what happens when you try to draw differences between low input farming versus high input farming? If you try to draw inferences based on productivity, which we have seen before also, and it is with respect to scale, that the low input farming systems are better in terms of productivity than high input farming systems. That's all right, that's perfectly all right. But what happens when you talk about efficiency? Now you must be thinking, I'm talking about efficiency, I'm talking about productivity, and what's wrong here? It's almost the same term. To answer the question, they are not the same term, because productivity is not equal to efficiency. And why is that? Because productivity means just output per unit of input. But when you talk about efficiency, there's a 100% efficient farm somewhere, which is the standard input. So your efficiency measures is actual output divided by the standard input. So there's a clear difference. So what's the scene here? You can be productive, but you can still be inefficient. So there's always a gap of improvement. You can always improve it, so that you can be more effective, more efficient, and more productive. To put it in numbers, we rate low input farming systems versus high input farming systems. How do they compare each other in terms of numbers? you can see that the conventional farms, they can produce the same amount of yield as low-input farming systems in just 50 to 70% of the land use. But if you compare the other way around, the organic farms or the low-input farms, they produce maximum of 80% of the conventional farms in the same amount of area. So there's a clear difference. Now, why I want to do this study? Why this study is so important? This study is important to have an in-depth understanding of the efficiency of agricultural farms in Europe. Also, this study will help to enhance agricultural production practices and to improve technological use in the current scenarios. And I also think that the output or the results from this study will help to have a basis for design and development of a potential policy about the farm efficiency in Europe, which has been lacking till date. There has, to take it further, because there has not been a direct study which considers small farmers and the European Union as a whole and studies the efficiency, because there is no policy about it, there is no study about it as a whole. Yes, there have been localized studies. There was a study in Greece. I think there were a couple of studies in Italy, and there was a really good study in Slovenia. And they studied small farmers, and what they found out that the small farmers are allocatively more efficient. But what happens when you talk about technical efficiency or the economic efficiency? The small farmers are not that good in that manner. I think I use three terms here, which is technical efficiency, economic efficiency, and allocative efficiency. And it's completely all right if I take a detour for 2 minutes and just explain what these terms mean. Okay, so let's just talk about the production scenario. Let's keep it simple. We will use two inputs, we will make an output, and we will see how the farms behave in that manner. So let's assume that you are using two inputs, x1 and x2. You produce an output, which is y. You can see from this graph, the inputs are on the axis. You can see a curve over here, which is the production, which is the efficient frontier. I call it the efficient unit one, and it shows all the technically efficient farms or countries or persons. So every farm on this line, they are technically efficient. They're okay. But you can also see there is a farm named P, which is not on the technically efficient frontier. Yes, P also produces 1 unit of output using the same inputs. But you can clearly see here that P uses more of x1, less of x2. So this is not technically efficient because it stays away from the frontier. So how do we measure the inefficiency or technical efficiency of P in this manner? That's just, you can see there's a difference. So how do we measure the difference? We say that the technical efficiency is the ratio of the optimal resource use, which should lie on the efficient frontier, and the actual resource use, which is the point P itself. So what is it? It's OR divided by OP. That's your technical efficiency. You can see it over here. Talking about the allocative efficiency, what is allocative efficiency? When we talk about allocative efficiency, we take account of the cost line, the ISO cost line, the budget line. The line which tells you how cost efficient you are, because there is a constraint of money to it. In this way, there is a point Q, which also lies on the frontier, but of all the points on the frontier, only Q is the one which is producing at the least cost, which is producing with the cost efficiency. So we say that the allocative efficiency is the ratio between the minimum cost, which is OS, and the actual cost, which is OR, and you take the ratio here, and you have the allocative efficiency. Economic efficiency or the overall efficiency, it's really simple. You just multiply the efficiency with the allocative efficiency, and you build the overall efficiency. I think I will get back to my presentation, which is about the objectives. When we started writing the research proposal, I came up with a lot of objectives, and we discussed it with Bernie. We were like, you're not Superman. You have to, like, one particular objective. There's all this time to study more widely, probably in a PhD. Let's see. The general objective for this study is to formulate potential policy recommendations based on the efficiency analysis, which I will make for farms in the European Union. But more specifically, it will be directed towards small farmers in the European Union. So we will see the policy conclusions about the efficiency of those farmers. My hypothesis states that there is no significant difference between the efficiency measures of the small farms and big farms. And the ultimate hypothesis is the opposite. The materials and methods, as I said, my area of study will be European Union, and you can see the demographic details of the European Union down here. That's it's not really much important. Coming to the data collection, how am I going to collect the data? The data is not being collected by me. I'm going to use the Farm Accountancy Data Network, which is a part of the Agriculture and Rural Development Department of the European Commission. They have a really good database. I will use this database. I will find out which variables I'm going to use, which kind of farms I'm going to use, which are the measures I'm going to study, which are the inputs I'm going to use in my study. I will use it, I will analyze it, I will make a report out of it, which will feature in my thesis. I talked about Farm Accountancy Data Network, but what it is exactly. So to give you just a brief review of it, the Farm Accountancy Data Network is derived from national surveys, which are conducted around the European Union, and it's really reliable data for microeconomic farm data because there's nobody who collects data on such a wide scale around the European Union, the whole European Union. So it's a really good database. To provide numbers, to give you an insight into how good the database is, the database has some 80,000 land holdings data, some 5 million farms in the European Union, and it covers approximately 90% of the agriculture output as well as the agricultural land. So it's really wide data, covers almost everything. So there's a huge possibility of drawing a sample out of this really good database and having a really good representative sample. So there's a really good probability of that. The limitation of my study is that it is based on secondary data. So what's the problem with the secondary data? Because I'm not going to even feel myself, I'm not going to ask the farmers myself, I'm not going to measure the input use myself. So there can be some biases about it. There can be some biases when the data was collected. So what is the main problem with secondary data? There are 4 problems, which are mentioned here. There's a problem of availability, there's a problem of reliability, there's a problem of compatibility, and there's a problem of validation. So how do I intend on tackling these issues with the Farm Accountancy Data Network? Because the Farm Accountancy Data Network database is really good and it's really available to the public, so its availability is okay. Reliability, maybe okay, maybe not okay. Compatibility, there's a problem because I don't have any other comparable source where I can check the data from. And validation is almost okay, that's not a problem for the data. So how I intend on doing the data analysis? There's the database again from the Farm Accountancy Data Network. There's a huge sample, huge data. There's I told you, like 80,000 farm holdings and 5 million farms. So that's a really big database. I will draw a small sample out of it, which I think will be really a good representative sample. I will feed it into an open source software, like open source BIA or maybe BA 6.5 or maybe some other database. We have not come to a conclusion about it. We will use this to find out the measures of technical, economic, and allocated efficiencies. Then we will use these outcomes from the study. We will translate into conclusions how these efficiency measures mean to the European Union, how much do they mean to the European Union and to the European agriculture. But as I said before, that I'm also going to look at it from a policy point of view. How can you formulate policies which direct the small farmers to use inputs more efficiently? Because as I said, it costs a lot of money to implement CAP and to implement the basic idea of it. So that's what I want to do here. This is the timeline of my study, which is already in my proposal. So I don't think I need to discuss a bit more about it. That's all about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good timing again. Very well done, all of you, this afternoon. Questions? Floor is open.
Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one is in one of your first slides, when you said that the project or the policy about efficiency and so on, it's 55% on the total budget of European Union policies.
Yes.
Is it right?
Yeah, that's right. It's taken from the document. I'm not making
Okay.
that.
So my question is just.
But yeah, but there's only 2 European policies, transport and agriculture.
Okay. So,
Just makes sense.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You finished with your question?
Finish.
Are you through with your question?
okay, and the second one is how will you establish which is a good samples among all the samples
The topic is itself from a project called Solidarity, But when we started discussing it, we said that we are not going to only discuss their, let's go broad, let's take account of other farms. So we will just draw a random sample. We'll download the data, we will see how much of it is representative, and we'll draw a sample, a random data.
So it will be random.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to ask, you already have an idea of the kind of aspect you want to measure the technical efficiency or economical cost. Do you have an idea?
The way you analyze DIA, the data analysis, which you saw in the first semester,
Okay.
you just tell the software what is the stream of inputs and what is the stream of outputs, and it calculates for you how technically efficient it is, how you monitor.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's how it's done. You can also do it on Excel, but I think there's a limit for it. So it's okay to use the computer software which analyzes the large set of data.
That's good.
Questions? Please.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions and then some remarks as well. So you mentioned synthetic inputs. So what do you mean?
Inputs which are chemical in nature, which are not produced from your farm, so which you buy from the market.
So how do you link it? Like, why did you come up with mentioning synthetic inputs? What's the link with your low input and high input?
Because low input, it does not mean that you're not going to use it. That yes, you're going to use it. The point I wanted to make is the high input farms, they use a lot of synthetic inputs because they don't use farm manure. They just go ahead with fertilizers and other inputs, maybe hybrid seeds. So if you use more of those synthetics, it has a detrimental effect on the environment. And in one of the studies, I think it was from Netherlands, and when we use DIA, we also have a maximizing function. So you try to maximize the output, but in case you use a lot of synthetics, your output is also a detrimental effect to the environment, and you don't want to maximize it. So that's where the difference comes in. So that's why I wanted to say that the low input farm systems already use a low amount of synthetic inputs. So there's a clear difference.
And the title of your presentation is Low Input Farming, if you can bring it back, is low input farming input efficient?
Yeah.
How do you link that to small farmers? Do you imply that?
That's the point, because I talked to Gerard and we were like, we will change it a bit later because that's not exactly what I want to do. Because
So why do you want to?
I can make it as, I can try to link it with small farms, but input efficiency of the small farms. I can use both, or I can just say small farms, because I can do it with terms of input, I can do it with terms of size. So I can do it both ways. But this is just the official title which was available on the website. But this is not the final title, obviously.
Okay. Then I have a last question. You show the graph of with the frontier, there is a coastline. Do you know, for instance, what the slope of the coastline? How do you get to the coastline?
You have the usage, I mean the cost, and how I understand is in the equation, you just make one as 0 and you take the price, and you take the other one as 0 and you take the second price, and you have 2 points and you just go with the price.
Yeah. So the price
Yeah,
is price one.
because when you talk about allocative efficiency, you always talk about the price. Because all these points in this curve, they're already technically efficient, but it does not mean that they use the least cost combination. So you always need to check the tangent, and that's the point where you have the least cost combination.
Yeah. I have just a last remark regarding the reliability of the data that you are going to use.
Yeah.
Do you know what the minimum size of the farm in order that the farm is sampled in your data set?
That I did not decide yet, but
That's important to know because actually 5 hectares are not sampled.
Yes, exactly. And that's how the data will also help me. Because if you read the description on the website, they already say that they sample only those farms, they collect data from only those farms which are considered commercial, if I'm right.
Exactly, yeah.
That's given in the website. So that's where it helps me a lot. Because then I don't have to worry about the minimum budget.
I was just wondering, will you make any distinction between the sector of production? Because you don't mention any of the production sectors, and I can imagine that the inputs that are being used in crop production is different from dairy, is different
I will make a distinction.
Prices, price fluctuations.
I will make a
Is
distinction.
it worthwhile to focus on one or the other? Or will you, if you say no input, is it then just about fertilizers, mechanization? Or is it also about feed types,
It's also,
animal production?
it's also up to animal production, because there are dairy farms who use really less inputs.
Yeah.
But yes, I will make a distinction between them. Because the official topic is related to the solid dairy project, which is only for dairy. But when we started discussing, we discussed that let's not just do dairy, but let's go broad and study a bit more about other types of farms.
So you will focus more on the efficiency relationships than actually on the farming systems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm also puzzled then by your objective, which is to make policy formulations. It's of course the ultimate aim of many of our research is to come to policies. But you think you will be able to do it with the type of research that you want to perform?
Yeah. Because in this kind of scenario, you take the price as well as the amount of input you're using.
Yeah.
But I think if there is an inefficient farm, if there is a small farm, let's say, which is not producing on an efficient frontier, which is over from the outcome, like we can make it legally binding, or maybe we can include it in the policy that you should use this amount of input, or maybe you can start to give subsidies, because that's also a point we discussed about subsidies. So I can also check the effect of subsidies, and there was a really good study in Greece about it for sheep, but that was a different field. But yes, you can always make policy formulations about how we are going to direct farmers to use it.
If your scenarios are defined as policy changes, if your scenarios, the ones that you want to measure, the effect of our policy scenarios, no? Because I don't see how you can measure, policies if you're not doing some scenarios like you're mentioning subsidies or something. So you define then scenarios which are policies. Sorry for the confusion. And then perhaps the last question. Will you also make distinctions between regions? Because probably quite much of the efficiency will depend on regional characteristics as well.
Yeah, and the database gives you an option to select region ones.
And do you have any idea how small, how detailed you need to go into? It's totally open question, no? But whether you can take Flanders or whether you need to take East Flanders or...
That's two. That's two
That's two level. Okay.
No, I didn't think about
Yeah,
that.
well, it's just...
Well, definitely a small farm in Greece wouldn't be a small farm in Belgium.
Yeah,
So you
so
do that
the growing conditions will be totally different, so also your technical efficiency.
you cannot compare
No.
pears and apples.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm wondering whether in data you can put that all together, whether you should not make different models for different regions.
Oh yes, or you can cluster them.
You can cluster them. Okay, ambitious, eh? Very good. Okay, if there are no more questions, no? Then we stop here. Thank you very much for your contributions and for your presentations, and very well done presenting.